I'm Katrina Menne, Sigma and data visualization expert, and this is Sigma Computing Best Practices Pitstop Tables. In this video, we're going to cover what Pitstop tables are, why you should be using them, and a scenario which you have to use them. Let's hop into a workbook. To understand what a Pitstop table is, I'm going to first talk a little bit about the basic structure and lineage of elements in Sigma. This is an empty page on a workbook. And when I want to pull in a data source or I want to pull in something to start doing some analysis or some visualization, I need to first tell Sigma where to find the data. And this is where our data lineage begins. First, I want to add a table element. I'm going to select here, and now I can choose or tell Sigma where to source that data. Most of the time, you're going to be using either a table or a data set or a data model. I'm going to select a data source, and this is a source coming directly from my database. And this is really important to understand that this is a database table, not necessarily a table element. But now once we have this table element, it becomes a table element in our workbook. So let's look at the data lineage in order to understand this difference. The data lineage is down in the bottom left corner. And here we can see a flow of data within Sigma. So again, we have our data source. This is going to be our Plugs Electronic hands-on lab data table within our Snowflake connection. We can see that it's the Sigma sample database, and this is the location of that table. Now, once I connected Sigma to it, we can see that this is a table element. This is something that is brought into a workbook and will exist within this workbook itself. It's not going to affect or change anything within our data source table. It only exists within this workbook right now. Let me go back to this element. And now I'm going to do something else to continue the lineage. I'm going to create what's called a child element. Here, I'm going to select visualization and we'll create something pretty simple. Let's just do sum of price by product type. Let's go back to our lineage to understand how this has changed. Now we can see that we have an additional element on our page or on our lineage. So a way to think about this is that this bar chart is a child element of this table, or this table element is a parent element of this child element. This parent-child relationship is essential to understanding how to model data and how to best use data within Sigma workbooks. And this is why we need to understand what a Pitstop table is. Pitstop table is an unofficial name for an element that is in between your original data source and everything else. So what I mean by that is that we have our original data source over here in our Plugs Electronic. This is sort of like a Pitstop table between our data source and our visualization element. So let me add something that does not include a Pitstop table to help contrast this. I'm going to go back to my page, and here I'm going to select just a bar chart. I'm going to choose a different table so that we can understand and really clearly see the difference between these. So I'm just going to select the MLB Stadium sales. Let's make a bar chart, something similar where we've got our product type, and then we'll do the sum of revenue. So now we can see that we have another element in here, but let's go back to our lineage to see how these are different. Here we can see that there's a direct connection from our database table to our visualization element. Again, not having a table element or something within your workbook in between your data source and your visualization. So why is this so important? There are 3 different reasons why we want to include Pitstop tables in our workbook development. Sigma's really flexible, so in some scenarios, you don't have to use this. You don't have to include a Pitstop table, but as someone who has developed thousands of workbooks across several different organizations, it is a strong recommendation. It's something that I wish I knew when I started using Sigma. And the main reason behind that is that you don't want to paint yourself into a corner. You want to give yourself flexibility within your data modeling because you don't know what you may want to add later. Adding a Pitstop table gives you freedom and flexibility in your data modeling, and there's no downside. It doesn't affect your workbook speed or really anything within there. You do want to make sure to not have too many Pitstop tables because it can become kind of confusing or just unruly. In general, you do want to keep a Pitstop table in between every original data source and the first time you're interacting with it in order to give you that flexibility. So let's take a look at what it looks like to have that flexibility. I'm going to go to my plugs electronic. The first reason that we want to have this Pitstop table is just efficiency. Since Sigma is built off of a parent-child relationship, anything that I do in my parent element is going to affect or cascade down to my child element. I like to be efficient in my workbook builds, and so let's say I want to filter to only a specific product type. We can see that when I change something in my parent element, it does affect or cascade down to my bar chart. This is really helpful when we want to make sure that we're keeping things efficient, having accurate calculations, as well as simple things like formatting. So if I apply a formatting change here, we can see that it cascades down to or is inherited by this element as well. The second scenario in which we want to do this is for window calculations or things that require or should use groupings. So an example of this is going to be ranking. Let's say we want to rank our product type by revenue or sales. In this table element, I'm going to group by my product type. I'm going to pull in my sum of sales or sum of price in this scenario. And now I'm going to create a rank calculation on top of this. All right, I'm going to collapse this just so we can see how we have a ranking in here. We can see that arts and entertainment is our first one. Now let's go to that other element to understand how we would create that in something that doesn't have a parent element. So if I go back to my bar chart and I create this in here, I can create a calculation that's going to live inside of this element and only inside of this element. So I'm going to create a ranking calculation in my bar chart. We'll do rank, and we want to do the sum of revenue. All right, so I have my calculation, and let's just color by it in order to see what it gives us. So we can see that it's not really giving us a desired result. It's not telling me which one is first or second. And this is due to the way that Sigma creates groupings on the back end of visualizations. So let's take a look at the underlying data. In here, we can see that we're getting a rank for each kind of sum of revenue, and it's splitting it out in a way that we don't want in this scenario. If we go back to our plugs electronic, we can see how when we create something in a parent element, we're able to use the results of that calculation in our child element. So let me go back to here, and we'll color this one based off of our rank. So now we can see we are returning one rank per category. The main reason why you want to give yourself flexibility in data modeling within elements in Sigma is the ability to create a calculation and then use the results of that calculation within a child element. The next scenario requires a Pitstop table. Let's go back to our lineage to understand this. In this scenario, we want to materialize something from our workbook. Materializations are sort of like a copy and paste as values from Excel or Google Sheets into our database. We want to tell Sigma, hey, calculate these things, and then let's use the results of them so that we can improve performance. One of the things that's really important to understand about data modeling and materializations in particular is that once you create that materialization in your lineage, everything to the left of it or everything in that parent element needs to stay the same in order for the materialization to be useful. So if you think about, again, looking at an Excel file, if you change something in your data source on the front end, and then you had copy and pasted that into a separate Excel file, that's not going to be updated. And it's the same concept here. So in order to create materializations, let's go to this section, advanced options, and then schedule materializations. What this is going to do is, again, create a materialization of this element. So in this scenario, what I would actually want to do is create a second Pitstop table or an additional Pitstop table in between these two elements so that I can have my materialized table and then use that in results, and I can continue to model on top of those materialized results. So you might be thinking to yourself, I already have these workbooks made. How can I go back in and apply these best practices? Do I have to start over? And the really awesome thing about Sigma is that you don't have to start over. Let me show you a way that if you want to, you can add those Pitstop tables in even if you forget them. So let me go to this element, the bar chart where we do not have our Pitstop table. What I'm going to do is come up here and select a table. I'm just going to select to add a new table element from the existing database table selection. So we were looking at our MLB, and now we can see that we have our table element in here. Let's hop back to the lineage to help understand how these two things are connected. So it's really easy to see here that both of these elements are sourced from the same database table, but they're not in the same level of lineage. So what we want to do is take this parent element and make this be a child element on top of this one, similar to what we have here. So let's go to this bar chart. And all I need to do is change the data source for it. So I'm going to go to the three-dot menu, go to element source, and then I'm going to click change source. This time I do want to choose an existing table element as opposed to the data source table. So I have it on this page, so I'm going to select here. We'll select this one. And now let's go back to our lineage. Here we can see that Sigma has reordered our elements within our workbook. We now have the MLB Stadium sales table element as a parent element of that bar chart. So again, if I go in and edit something within here, let's say I just want to keep this product line, we can see that our child element also updates. In summary, it is a best practice to always add a Pitstop table within your workbooks in order to give yourself flexibility within your analysis. Sigma is really great at being very flexible, and organizations are always looking for new ways to look at their data. So make sure to future-proof your workbooks by including a Pitstop table. Thanks for tuning into this video. Please let me know if you have any questions or any other scenarios that you'd like to understand best practices for in Sigma.